Hi, everybody. Welcome to the lecture on behavior and cognitive therapies. So far, when we've looked at therapies, we've touched a little bit on medication, and we've also delved deep into techniques used in psychoanalysis. Behavior therapies are all based on the principles from the learning unit. Let's get started. So a good definition of behavior therapy is therapy that applies learning principles to the elimination of unwanted behaviors. So you remember those learning principles: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, things like reinforcement schedules, those kinds of things. So these techniques include mostly classical conditioning and operant conditioning theories. So let's talk a little bit about counter conditioning. These include what we call exposure therapies. So for example, exposure therapies might be very helpful in treating phobias. So for example, you have systematic desensitization. This is a type of exposure that associates a pleasant, relaxed state with gradually increasing anxiety-triggering stimuli. As I said, it's commonly used to treat phobias. So let's take a fear of flying in an airplane. You would take step-by-step ideas related to flying in an airplane. So for example, looking at an airplane in a magazine, and you would be in a pleasant, relaxed state. And gradually, the therapist would give you some anxiety-triggering stimuli related to flying, like that magazine picture. Then you'd go and you'd watch planes take off and land at the airport. Then perhaps you'd actually go onto an airplane, but maybe not fly in it, till you gradually are flying. It's a great form of therapy that allows the subject, the patient, the client, to feel in a relaxed state, but gradually facing their fear. Another type of exposure therapy is virtual reality exposure therapy. This is an anxiety treatment that progressively exposes people to electronic simulations of their greatest fears. So again, like airplane flying, spiders, public speaking. So you would do it virtually, like online, so that you could face your fear, but in an environment where you're not actually with the spider. So aversive conditioning, if you remember taste aversions, for example, gets you to hate something because it's been paired with something that creates a really unpleasant feeling. So let's say you want to eliminate your desire to have alcohol or anything in that realm. So this graphic here shows what you would have to do with aversive conditioning. You would basically pair the alcohol with some sort of drug that makes you nauseous, and this is a real treatment. Drug that makes you nauseous, and therefore the nausea is then connected to the feeling to the alcohol, and therefore the subject does not want the alcohol because nobody wants to feel nauseous. So the drug makes you nauseous, which is the unconditioned stimulus, paired with the alcohol, then creates this feeling of nausea, and the response is that you no longer want the alcohol because it's connected to the nausea feeling. Now, those were classical conditioning behavior therapies. These coming up are operant conditioning behavior therapies. So one of the most common type of operant conditioning behavior therapy is what we call a token economy. The idea behind this is people earn a token of some sort, whatever that might be, for exhibiting a desired behavior, and then can later exchange those tokens for various privileges or treats. So I'll tell you the example with my children when they were really little, and I was trying to get them to learn to clean up the basement playroom or make their beds or brush their teeth, things like that. We had a star chart. And so for every desired behavior they did, they would get a star. every 10 stars, they got to pick out a prize at the $1 bin there at Target. They're like $1 or $3 somewhere in there. And they would love to do that. And it's cheap, and they could trade in their stars for a cheap little token or toy that they really liked. Now, there are some problems with this. First of all, how long will the behaviors actually last? Like, how durable? How long, for example, would Sophie and Andrew be to make their beds and clean the basement playroom? Like, how long does that actually last? Because honestly, as we've talked, motivation has to really come from within. Like, they have to really want to clean the basement playroom. And then the other piece is it right for one human to control another's behavior? So in parenting, yes, you have to sort of have some semblance of control over little kids, especially teaching them things. But when you're out in the world, how right is that? Like, how ethical is that? So that's some questions, some criticisms of the token economy. Now, there's also what we call cognitive therapies. Keep in mind that cognitive refers to thinking, problem solving, judgment making. So cognitive therapy is all based on your thoughts have an impact on your behavior, which then has an impact on your feelings about a situation, which then has an impact on your thoughts and your behavior, and over and over and over again. So a good definition of cognitive therapy is this is a therapy that teaches people new and more adaptive ways of thinking. It's based on the assumption that thoughts can intervene between events and emotional reactions. So in other words, we can sort of talk ourselves into or out of different behaviors based on our emotional reactions. And there's a step. In other words, it's not automatic. We can actually sort of talk ourselves down or talk ourselves up, depending on whatever the situation is. So your rational emotive therapy was very controversial, created by Albert Ellis, and this was a form of cognitive therapy that involved confrontational interactions, and it really vigorously challenged people's what Ellis perceived to be people's illogical, self-defeating attitudes and assumptions. So in other words, you as the therapist, you would be right at the person saying, no, you're wrong, you're not making sense. It was almost borderline verbally offensive because it was so in your face against these person's self-defeating attitudes. It's very controversial. Now, one of the most popular forms of therapy in the United States today is cognitive behavioral therapy. This is a combination, so it's known as CBT. It is a combination, very popular in integrative therapy that combines cognitive therapy, which obviously changes these sort of self-defeating thoughts, with behavior therapy in changing your behavior. So it takes sort of the best of both worlds of the cognitive behavior and the behavior therapy and puts it together. So you can challenge your self-defeated thinking if you are upset about something, depressed or what have you. And then that can then work to help change your behavior. So here's an example. And I love these little charts. Very, very easy to understand where they're coming at. So cognitive therapy. Let's say the bad thing that happens to you is you lose your job. Now, one way to go is your internal beliefs say, I'm worthless, it's hopeless, I'm never going to find another job, no one's ever going to want to hire me. All these sort of self-defeating thoughts. So in your mind, that's the cognition. And the result of that is depression. But when you're in cognitive therapy, the therapist will say, okay, the bad thing is you lost your job. But the therapist gets you to believe something different, works with the patient to believe something like, my boss is a jerk, I deserve something better. Not totally your fault for losing your job. That then leads to no depression. So the idea is to change your way of thinking, change your thinking patterns from the negative to the less negative or more positive, resulting in no depression. So, again, with the rational emotive behavior therapy, Albert Ellis challenged people's sort of irrational way of thinking. And this is an important piece to note under cognitive therapy in terms of sort of a historical perspective. There's my little Chuck Brown again. Love him. So, Aaron Beck is another popular cognitive therapist who designed a therapy for depression. And he took a page out of Albert Ellis's book, except it was less harsh. So what he did was he explained that, what people do is they sort of make these beliefs, these catastrophic beliefs. And what he would do in therapy, and his technique was to reveal to the patient, the client, that their thinking was so, excuse me, so irrational and didn't make any sense. Why are you, you being so self-defeating? And so it was a slightly more rational version of, gentle, rational version of this rational emotive therapy. So in kind of conclusion, your cognitive behavioral therapy combines the best of cognitive and the best of behavioral therapies and puts them together. It aims to change the person's thinking and their behavior all at once. And I had said a couple minutes ago that it is very popular in the United States because it's so, it can be so quick, and it's something you can do today. The minute you walk out of the therapist's office, you can start work on changing your thinking and changing your behavior. So it can be very exciting and be very, very helpful for people. And so here is simply a chart of cognitive therapies, some of the different techniques that are used. You don't have to go through every single one of these beliefs. But what ends up happening is in cognitive therapies, the therapist does one of three things, or a combination of these three things. They reveal the beliefs, they test your beliefs, and then they try and change your beliefs. Because what we believe is how we act. That's the theory behind the cognitive therapy. So what we tell ourselves is then shapes our behavior. And then that shapes our life. And the result of that can be either negative or positive or somewhere in between. So the cognitive therapist's job is to take a look at exploring your beliefs and questioning your beliefs and testing your beliefs and trying to change your negative beliefs, or at least get you to understand that you can change your thinking, that you don't have to be trapped into this negative way of thinking. And then that works to change your behavior. So here is a chart of all these modern psychotherapies. Remember, psychotherapies are an umbrella term that refers to all talk therapy. None of this is related to medication. That's tomorrow's class, tomorrow's lecture, the next time we meet. So what you have here are a series of different types of therapy that involves talking, either one-on-one with the therapist or in group or family counseling. There's psychodynamic, which is Freud and psychoanalysis. Client-centered is the humanistic form, and that's Maslow and Carl Rogers, where they look for potential and they look to see the person's growth. There's behavior therapy, which we looked at with the different learning principles. There's cognitive therapy, where you're trying to defeat negative thoughts. The cognitive behavioral therapy looks to take self-harmful thoughts and behaviors and then sort of promote a healthier way of thinking. And then finally, your group and family therapies work to help sort out stressful relationships. And you can put marriage counseling in that as well, in that category as well. So these are all psychotherapies, another phrase meaning talk therapy. Now, which of our disorders that we studied do these help? Well, of course, anxiety and depression. And so those are two of those categories. But then you have schizophrenia. Now, a very, what could be sort of an offset of schizophrenia is anxiety and depression. So a lot of these therapies do help with schizophrenia. But with schizophrenia, it's so biological in nature that in our next class, when we talk about the biomedical treatments, you'll see how it's so important to have some sort of medication for schizophrenia combined with one or more of these types of psychotherapies. So I hope that you've answered all the questions that came in this Ed Puzzle video and that a lot of your questions have gotten answered on different types of therapies. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And in our next lecture, we will talk about biomedical treatments. Until next time.